Have you ever woken up with the certainty that something is fundamentally wrong? Not with the world, but with your perception of it? You awaken to a dread that has no source, an atmospheric pressure on the soul that arrived before your consciousness. It isn't stress about the day's tasks, nor the echo of a nightmare. It is a silent, persistent error in the very foundation of reality. A low, constant hum that announces the day has already begun, irrevocably broken. Over the following months, this feeling becomes your constant companion, a shadow that follows you even into the brightest rooms. The sleepless nights accumulate into an unpayable debt, while joy becomes a foreign language whose words you recognize, but whose meaning is forever lost to you. You observe the seemingly happy and content figures surrounding you as if they were an alien species, moving with a purpose that feels like an elaborate charade. An invisible yet impenetrable wall of glass separates you from them. You see their smiles and hear their laughter, but the sound is muffled, distant, as if coming from another world. Trying to communicate what you feel is an exercise in futility. How do you describe a weight that has no mass, an ache that has no wound? The words crumble in your mouth, inadequate and trivial. To speak of it, you fear, would only give it form, summoning a monster from the darkness into the light of day, and you don't want to inflict that ugliness upon their seemingly intact world. So you fall silent. Silence becomes your armor and your cell. A deep rift opens between your former self, the person who had passions, who looked forward to the weekend, and the specter you've become. Your hobbies, once your refuge, are now artifacts from a past life. Silent monuments that accuse you of abandonment. Your loved ones notice, of course. They see a stillness, a distance, a light that has gone out in your eyes. But unlike a broken arm, the symptoms are too subtle, too ambiguous to warrant real concern. They don't know how to ask, and you wouldn't know how to answer. Then, in the midst of this gray desert, something even stranger and more violent happens. Every now and then, without warning, you wake up feeling euphoric, overflowing with an electric, feverish energy, almost godlike. Ideas flow through you in an uncontrollable torrent. You feel invincible, brilliant, on the verge of unlocking the secrets of the universe. This mania, however, only isolates you further. Your desperate joy and rapid speech frighten and confuse the very people your sadness had already pushed away. You are an incomprehensible enigma, alone in your void, and just as alone in your delirious ecstasy. It is in the twilight moments of self-reflection, when one of these manic peaks has collapsed into ruin, that you finally see. You behold the totality of your anguish with a brutal, terrifying clarity. It's like developing X-ray vision for despair, a laser that cuts through the facade of life and reveals the painful impermanence of everything. You perceive the insistent misery of being, and your only sense of comfort, your only stability, comes from the grim acknowledgement that there is, in fact, nothing to be hopeful for. What if this anguish isn't a sickness that distorts reality, but the painful removal of a veil that kept you from seeing it as it truly is? The writer David Foster Wallace perfectly captured this trap by comparing the situation to jumping from a burning building. The terror of falling from a great height remains absolute, but the terror of the flames approaching from behind becomes the decisive variable. When the fire gets close enough, falling to your death becomes the slightly lesser of two terrors. It's not a desire for the fall. It is the absolute, inescapable terror of the flames. How can something so destructive feel, in its most lucid moments, like the truth itself? This question launches you on a desperate search for answers, not for a cure, but for a diagnosis of the human condition itself. You discover that the language we use for this experience is a crude, almost useless tool. There is a clinical distinction between depression as a state or mood, a dark but expected color in the vast tapestry of life, and depression as a crippling disorder. While the former is an understandable reaction to loss, the latter is the loss of the ability to react at all. It manifests with a relentless constellation of symptoms, a sadness that feels like it has physical weight, crying spells with no trigger, a hopelessness so profound it colors the future gray, a vibrant anxiety that never ceases, states of insomnia that turn the night into a torture chamber. and a total loss of interest in the activities that once defined who you were. To separate it from ordinary sadness, its symptoms are persistent, stretching on for months, turning existence into a monotonous and exhausting monologue. You learn that science, in its attempt to map this darkness, began with the theory of chemical imbalances, an elegant but incomplete explanation. Deeper investigations reveal that the very architecture of your brain may be changing. The hippocampus, the seat of memory and emotion, can literally shrink under the chronic siege of stress and despair. Genetics also plays its cruel role, equipping some individuals with a predisposition that makes them far more likely to plunge into sustained despair after a trauma. And here you find one of biology's most brutal ironies. Many of these genes are intrinsically linked to inflammatory properties. Evolutionary psychology offers a disturbing hypothesis. Depression may have survived in our gene pool as an archaic survival mechanism, a way to force the body to withdraw, conserve energy, and heal in a primitive world filled with physical threats. Your body, in its ancient and misguided wisdom, may be trying to protect you from a predator that no longer exists, trapping you in a mental cage to fight a ghost. But biology alone cannot explain the feeling, the existential character of this suffering. Depression carries with it a sense of unfounded dread and despair. Unlike a sad person who can usually point to the source of their pain, the depressive is unable to identify why they feel this way. Instead, in an attempt to make sense of a nameless pain, you might latch onto universal and unsolvable questions. The apparent meaninglessness of existence, the inevitable tragedy of death, the cold indifference of the cosmos. Or perhaps, you project your inner despair onto insurmountable external conflicts, like climate change or economic crises. Schopenhauer perfectly captured this sensation when he spoke of the vanity of existence, of the crushing contrast between the infinity of time and space and the pathetic finitude of the individual. How does this lens, forged in the darkness of an unconfronted personal truth, silently shape every aspect of your reality? However, this inability to find an external source doesn't mean a personal cause is absent. On the contrary, it often means the true cause is buried too deep to be seen. A toxic relationship you refuse to acknowledge, an unfulfilling job that is slowly draining your soul, or even a repressed trauma from your childhood, a distant echo still reverberating through the walls of your psyche. What if the greatest consequence of this condition isn't sadness, but a clarity so brutal it makes normal life unbearable? This distorted lens silently shapes your reality in ways you are only just beginning to understand. It is here that you encounter the concept of depressive realism, a psychological theory that is both seductive and profoundly dangerous. The hypothesis suggests that depressed individuals, free from the optimistic illusions that shield the healthy mind, actually make more realistic and accurate inferences about the world. Under the cold, objective gaze of an fMRI machine, depressives prove to be more accurate in their judgments of positive and negative social events. While others engage in a slightly delusional optimism simply to get by, your mind, stripped of that protective layer, sees the harsh, uncomfortable truth without a filter. You are not broken. You are terrifyingly sober in a world that depends on a healthy dose of self-deception to function. And this forced sobriety exposes you directly to the great existential dilemmas that most people spend their entire lives successfully avoiding. First, your own impending death and the death of those you love. You feel this truth not as an abstract concept to be pondered, but as a constant physical presence in the room, a countdown timer audible only to you. Second, the vertiginous anxiety of absolute freedom, the realization that you are the sole author of your life, with no pre-written script, no cosmic safety net, is paralyzing. Third, the unbridgeable chasm that exists between minds, the painful reality that you can never truly understand or be understood by another human being, which condemns you to a fundamental and inescapable form of isolation. And last, and perhaps most crushing of all, the apparent, inherent meaninglessness of it all. These are the invisible consequences. You are not just feeling bad. You are overburdened by the raw truth of the human condition. The cognitive bias of negativity becomes your default setting, not by choice, but as a logical conclusion from your observations. Your brain, conditioned by months or years of despair, develops reinforced neural pathways for hopelessness. It literally becomes easier and faster to access thoughts of failure than of success. The culture around you exponentially worsens the problem. It sells a relentless narrative of perpetual happiness, effortless success, and a toxic positivity that leaves no room for legitimate pain. Any deviation from this norm is framed not as a valid human experience, but as a personal failure. So you hide. You wear a mask of normalcy. You perfect an empty smile. And you answer, "I'm fine," with a conviction you do not feel, which only deepens the corrosive sense of being a fraud in your own life. How can you rebel against a prison whose bars are forged from the truth itself? You begin to feel the desperate urgency to escape this trap, but every apparent exit leads to another wall. If you seek pharmaceutical treatment, the unsettling question arises. Are we to dismiss all our dark discoveries about the world as soon as our serotonin levels adjust? If the truths you found in your pain are real, then medication isn't a cure, but a veil, a voluntary return to blissful ignorance. If you seek therapy, you are forced to confront the undiscovered stressors, the personal truths your mind has worked so hard to bury. The path out leads directly through the epicenter of the pain you've been avoiding at all costs. The rebellion begins not with an answer, but with a radical shift in the very question you're asking. You have spent so long treating your existence as a problem to be solved, a faulty puzzle missing a crucial piece, that you never considered the alternative. The existential philosopher Gabriel Marcel distinguished between a problem and a mystery. A problem is something external to you, something that can be analyzed, fixed, and overcome. A mystery, however, is something you are a part of. You cannot stand apart from it to solve it, because you are implicated in the question itself. Your depression, your life, the meaning of your existence. These are not problems. They are mysteries, and mysteries do not demand solutions. They demand participation. This realization is the start of your rebellion. You stop fighting against the current and instead learn to navigate it. Here, you find the absurdism of Albert Camus. Camus argued that the human condition is defined by a fundamental incongruence. Our innate yearning for meaning, purpose, and clarity set against a silent, indifferent universe incapable of providing them. The product of this collision is the absurd. For so long you saw this dissonance as the source of your pain, but Camus proposes a three-part rebellion. Not vain hope, not suicide, but revolt, freedom, and passion. You revolt by refusing to give in to despair, by living in spite of meaninglessness. You embrace your freedom, recognizing that without a predetermined cosmic purpose, you are free to create your own. And you live with passion, wringing the most value out of experience precisely because it is finite and unguaranteed. Hope, as you knew it, was the real enemy. Nietzsche, through the story of Zeus's Pandora's box, called it the last and worst of all evils. For it is hope that prolongs man's torment, making him wait for a future reward instead of valuing life here and now. The rebellion, then, is to abandon hope for a specific outcome. The hope that one day you will be cured, that the world will make sense. In its place, Marcel suggests a different kind of hope, an absolute hope. It is not the hope that something will happen, but simply the act of hoping, a stubborn, patient affirmation that all is not necessarily lost. It is a strange hope, directed not at a bright future, but at the possibilities inherent in the present moment. It is the hope that gets you out of bed even when there is no apparent reason to. At this point, you are ready for the final truth. Carl Jung wrote that the greatest problems of life are never solved, only outgrown. This outgrowing does not mean the problem disappears, but that you develop a wider consciousness and the problem loses its paralyzing power. You don't defeat the darkness. You grow around it, integrating it into a larger whole, just as a tree grows around a wound in its trunk. Your anguish, your X-ray vision for despair, was not a lie. It was a part of the truth, seen too closely. The rebellion is not to reject this dark truth, but to place it in its proper context, alongside other truths. The beauty of a sunset, the connection in a moment of shared laughter, the satisfaction in the effort itself. So I leave you at the foot of the mountain. Like Camus's Sisyphus, you will always find your burden again. The boulder, your pain, your doubts, the weight of consciousness, will be there every morning. But now you possess a strange hope that rejects gods and instead raises rocks. You do not push the boulder in the hope of one day reaching the top and resting. You push it because in the effort itself, in the struggle toward the heights, you find your purpose. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself, forms a world. The universe, henceforth without a master, seems to you neither sterile nor futile. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill your heart. And in this conscious, lucid effort, you become the mystery of your own being. You become the hope that strives for its own resolution. And we can imagine you finally happy. This journey through the darkness is deeply personal, but it's rarely a lonely one. Many of us are pushing our own boulder up our own mountain. If this story resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. After all, what is the truth you found in your own struggle?